Hello, hello, hello. That was a very unsynchronized wave. I feel like this feels better. There we go. Hello, hello, hello. Hey, hey, hey. I hope you're having a great day. I am Hannah, aka the Paperback Bruncher, and we are back because we are going to be reading aloud one of my favorite stories of all time, which is, of course, Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, aka Lucy Maud Montgomery. And we have been reading this book for a minute now. So we're actually starting today on chapter 11. I know some people love to do an immersive read, which is where you're looking at a physical copy of the book and also listening. So feel free, if you want to read along with us, to open your book to chapter 11, which on mine is called Anne's Impressions of Sunday School. So that's where we'll be starting today. I'm going to read chapters 11 to 14. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that in my book. If you missed any of the previous parts, so chapters 1 through 10, those are all under the live tab on my YouTube. And you can also watch them all in a playlist now. So if you missed out before, it's super easy now that they're in the playlist. They'll just, you just start at the first video, and then when it finishes, it starts the next one for you. So super cool. That being said, this is one of my favorite stories. I know I've mentioned that a few times, so I have a lot of love for it. I'm doing my best to be your narrator and to, share my love of it with you. I haven't said this before, but I probably should add a little disclaimer that the views in the book, of course, are not my own. So just because I'm reading it aloud doesn't mean necessarily I agree with everything that they say or represent. I do really love Anne. There is a lot of religion, at least of this part of the story, which is not my favorite, but we will get to my favorite part soon when we get to meeting Gilbert. So, like I said, mentioned, we're starting at chapter 11. Give me one quick second. I am just going to move off camera to take off my Invisalign because my pronunciation gets a little bit tongue-tied, but nobody needs to watch me take those out. And I do have water. Make sure to grab your own tea, beverages, blankets, snacks, whatever you need to get all cozy. And I am ready to start reading. Hope I'm okay. Hello, hi Kim. Everything is well on my end. Everything is going good. I'm just excited to get back into the story. I am very far into prepping for the Tucson Festival of Books in Arizona Book Festival that's happening in 2 weeks. So I am in the thick of that, but I'm having so much fun right now. I feel like I'm truly in my bookish travel era, which is really, really fun. Just saying yes to all the things. And this has been a really nice experience because I feel like it's just been really grounding for me. It's returning to one of my favorite nostalgic reads. It gives me something to keep returning to with all of you. And it gives me a chance to practice my speaking aloud, my public speaking of sorts. And I don't know, it's just good time. But all right, that's it. If you are just joining in for the first time as well, this copy does have some illustrations. So in true read aloud fashion, when those images come up, I will show them to you as well so you can get that visual for the story. All right, let's do this. All right. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe. You're the best. Thank you, thank you. We're trying to grow this booktube. I'm trying to be a booktuber now. Okay, let's give you a little bit better angle. There we go. Now you can see the Anne's and the little women in the background too. All right. Anne's Impressions of Sunday School, Chapter 11. Well, how do you like them? Said Marilla. Anne was standing in the gable room, looking solemnly at 3 new dresses spread out on the bed. One was of a snuffy-colored gingham, which Marilla had been tempted to buy from a peddler the preceding summer because it looked so serviceable. One was of a black and white checked sateen, which she had picked up at a bargain counter in the winter. And one was a stiff print of an ugly blue shade, which she had purchased that week at a Carmody store. She had made them up herself, and they were all made alike. Plain skirts pulled tightly to plain waists, with sleeves as plain as waist and skirt and tight as sleeves could be. Imagine that I like them, said Anne soberly. I don't want you to imagine it, said Marilla, offended. Oh, I can see that you don't like the dresses. What is the matter with them? Aren't they neat and clean and new? Yes. Then why don't you like them? They're not pretty, said Anne reluctantly. Pretty? Marilla sniffed. I didn't trouble my head about getting pretty dresses for you. I don't believe in pampering vanity, Anne, I'll tell you that right off. Those dresses are good, sensible, and serviceable dresses, without any frills or furbelows about them, and they're all you've got this summer. The brown gingham one and the blue print will do you for school when you begin to go. The sateen is for church and Sunday school. I'll expect you to keep them neat and clean and not to tear them. I should think you'd be grateful to get most anything after those skimpy, wincey things you've been wearing. Oh, I am grateful, protested Anne, but I'd it be ever so much more gratefuler if you made just one of them with puffed sleeves. Puffed sleeves are so fashionable now. It would give me such a thrill, Marilla, just to wear a dress with puffed sleeves. Well, you'll have to do without your thrill. I hadn't any material to waste on puffed sleeves. I think that they are ridiculous-looking things anyhow. I prefer the plain, sensible ones. But I'd rather look ridiculous when everybody else does than plain and sensible all by myself, persisted Anne mournfully. Trust you for that. Well, hang those dresses carefully up in your closet. Sit down and learn the Sunday school lesson. I got a quarterly from Mr. Bell for you, and you'll go to Sunday school tomorrow, said Marilla, disappearing downstairs in High Dudgeon. Goodness gracious, these words are crazy. Anne clasped her hands and looked at the dresses. I did hope there would be a white one with puff sleeves, she whispered disconsolately. I prayed for one, but I didn't much expect it on that account. I didn't suppose God would have time to bother about a little girl's orphan dress. Oh, wow. You can tell I haven't talked to anyone today. I'll get in the groove in a sec here. A little orphan girl's dress. I knew I'd just have to depend on Marilla for it. Well, fortunately, I can imagine that one of them is a snow-white muslin with lovely lace frills and 3 puffed sleeves. The next morning, warnings of a sick headache prevented Marilla from going to Sunday school with Anne. You'll have to go down and call for Mrs. Lynde, Anne, she said. She'll see that you get into the right class. Now mind you behave yourself properly. Stay to preaching afterwards and ask Mrs. Lynde to show you our pew. Here's a cent for collection. Don't stare at people and don't fidget. I shall expect you to tell me the text when you come home. Anne started off irreproachably, arrayed in the stiff black and white sateen which, while decent as regards length and certainly not open to the charge of skimpiness, contrived to emphasize every corner and angle of her thin figure. Her hat was a little flat, glossy new sailor, the extreme plainness of which had likewise much disappointed Anne, who had permitted herself secret visions of ribbons and flowers. The latter, however, were supplied before Anne reached the main road, for being confronted halfway down the lane with a golden frenzy of wind-stirred buttercups in a wild glory of roses. Anne promptly and liberally garlanded her hat with a heavy wreath of them. Whatever other people might have thought of the result, it satisfied Anne, and she tripped gaily down the road, holding her ruddy head with its decoration of pink and yellow very proudly. When she had reached Mrs. Lynde's house, she found the lady gone. Nothing daunted, Anne proceeded onward to the church alone. In the porch, she found a crowd of little girls, all more or less gaily attired in white and blue and pinks, and all staring with curious eyes at this stranger in their midst, with her extraordinary head adornment. Avonlea little girls had already heard queer stories about Anne. Mrs. Lynde said she had an awful temper. Jerry Butte, the hired boy at Green Gables, said she talked all the time to herself or to the trees and flowers like a crazy girl. They looked at her and whispered to each other behind their quarterlies. Nobody made any friendly advances then or later on when the opening exercises were over and Anne found herself in Miss Rogerson's class. Miss Rogerson was a middle-aged lady who had taught a Sunday school class for 20 years. Her method of teaching was to ask the printed questions from the quarterly and look sternly over its edge at the particular little girl that she thought ought to answer the question. She looked very often at Anne, and Anne, thanks to Marilla's drilling, answered promptly, but it may be questioned if she understood very much about either question or answer. She did not think that she liked Mrs. Rogerson, and she felt very miserable. Every other little girl in the class had puffed sleeves. Anne felt that life was really not worth living without puffed sleeves. "Well, how did you like Sunday school?" Marilla wanted to know when Anne came home. Her wreath having faded, Anne had discarded it in the lane, so Marilla was spared the knowledge of that for a time. We've got a picture of Anne here picking her flowers down the lane, creating her beautiful wreath on her hat. So cute and precious. I love that. I'm honestly tempted to get another copy of this exact edition to frame one of these pieces on my wall. We'll see. So cute. I didn't like it a bit. It was horrid. "Anne Shirley," said Marilla rebukingly. Anne sat down on the rocker with a long sigh, kissed one of Bonnie's leaves, and waved her hand to a blossoming fuchsia. "He might have been lonesome while I was away," she explained. "And now, about the Sunday school. I behaved well, just as you told me. Mrs. Lynde was gone, but I went right on myself. I went into the church with a lot of other little girls, and I sat in the corner of the pew by the window while the opening exercises went on. Mr. Bell made an awfully long prayer. I would have been dreadfully tired before he got through it if I hadn't been sitting by that window. But I looked right out on the lake of shining waters, so I just gazed at that and imagined all sorts of splendid things." "You shouldn't have done anything of the sort. You should have listened to Mr. Bell." "But he wasn't talking to me," protested Anne. "He was talking to God, and he didn't seem to be very much interested in it either. I think he thought God was too far off to make it worthwhile. I said a little prayer myself, though. There was a long row of white birches hanging over the lake, and the sunshine fell down through them, way, way down, deep into the water. Oh, Marilla, it was like a beautiful dream. It gave me a thrill, and I just said, 'Thank you for it, God,' 2 or 3 times. "Not out loud, I hope," said Marilla anxiously. "Oh, no, just under my breath. Well, Mr. Bell did get through at last, and they told me to go into the classroom with Mrs. Rogerson's class. There were 9 other girls in it. They all had puffed sleeves. I tried to imagine that mine were puffed too, but I couldn't. Why couldn't I? I was as easy as you could be to imagine that they were puffed when I was alone in the east gable, but it was awfully hard there among the others who really, truly had puffs. You shouldn't have been thinking about your sleeves in Sunday school. You should have been attending to the lesson. I hope you knew it." "Oh, yes. And I answered a lot of questions. Mrs. Rogerson asked ever so many. I don't think it was fair for her to do all the asking. There was lots I wanted to ask her, but I didn't like to think because I didn't think she was a kindred spirit. Then all the other little girls recited a paraphrase. She asked me if I knew any. I told her I didn't, but I could recite 'The Dog at His Master's Grave' if she liked. That's in the Third Royal Reader. It isn't a really, truly religious piece of poetry, but it's so sad and melancholy that it might as well be. She said it wouldn't do, and she told me to learn the 19th paraphrase for next Sunday. I read it over in church afterwards, and it's splendid. There are 2 lines in particular that just thrill me. 'Quick as the slaughtered quadrants fell in Midian's evil day.' I don't know what squadrons means or Midian either, but it sounds so tragical. I can hardly wait until next Sunday to recite it. I'll practice it all the week. After Sunday school, I asked Miss Rogerson, because Mrs. Lynde was too far away, to show me her pew. I sat just as still as I could, and the text was Revelations, 3rd chapter, 2nd and 3rd verses. It was a very long text. If I was a minister, I'd pick the short, snappy ones. The sermon was awfully long, too. I suppose the minister had to match it to the text. I didn't think he was a bit interesting. The trouble with him seems to be he hasn't enough imagination. I didn't listen to him very much. I just let my thoughts run, and I thought of the most surprising things. Marilla felt helplessly that all this should be sternly reproved, but she was hampered by the undeniable fact that some of the things Anne had said, especially about the minister's sermons and Mr. Bell's prayers, were what she herself had really thought deep down in her heart for years, but had never given expression to. It almost seemed to her that those secret, unuttered, critical thoughts had suddenly taken visible and accusing shape and form in the person of this outspoken morsel of neglected humanity. Chapter 12, A Solemn Vow and Promise. It was not until the next Friday that Marilla had heard the story of a flower-wreathed hat. She came home from Mrs. Lynde's and called Anne to account. Anne, Mrs. Rachel said you went to church last Sunday with your hat rigged out, ridiculous, with roses and buttercups. What on earth put you up to such a caper? A pretty-looking object you must have been. Oh, I know pink and yellow aren't becoming to me, began Anne. Becoming fiddlesticks! It was putting flowers on your hat at all, no matter what color they were. That was ridiculous. You are the most aggravating child. I don't see why it's any more ridiculous to wear flowers on your hat than on your dress, protested Anne. Lots of little girls were there and had bouquets pinned on their dresses. What was the difference? Marilla was not to be drawn from the safe concrete into the dubious paths of the abstract. Don't answer me back like that, Anne. It was very silly of you to do such a thing. Never let me catch you at such a trick again. Mrs. Rachel said that she thought she would sink through the floor when she saw you come in all rigged out like that. She couldn't get near enough to tell you to take them off until it was too late. She said people talked about it something dreadful. Of course, they would think I had no better sense than to let you go decked out like that. Oh, I'm so sorry, said Anne, tears welling into her eyes. I never thought you'd mind. The roses and buttercups were so sweet and pretty. I thought they'd look lovely on my hat. Lots of the little girls had artificial flowers on their hats. I'm afraid I'm going to be a dreadful trial to you. Maybe you'd better send me back to the asylum. That would be terrible. I don't think that I could endure it. Most likely I would go into consumption. I'm so thin as it is, you see, but it would be better than being a trial to you. Nonsense, said Marilla, vexed at herself for having made the child cry. I don't want to send you back to the asylum, I'm sure. All I want is that you should behave like other little girls and do not make yourself ridiculous. Don't cry any more. I've got some news for you. Diana Barry came home this afternoon. I'm going up to see if I can borrow a skirt pattern from Mrs. Barry, and if you like, you can come with me and get acquainted with Diana. Anne rose to her feet with clasped hands, the tears still glistening on her cheeks. The dish towel she had been hemming slipped unheeded to the floor. Oh, Marilla, I'm frightened. Now that it has come, I'm actually frightened. What if she shouldn't like me? It would be the most tragical disappointment of my life. Now, don't get into a fluster. And I do wish you wouldn't use such long words. It sounds so funny in a little girl. I guess Diana will like you well enough. It's her mother you've got to reckon with. If she doesn't like you, it won't matter how much Diana does. If she's heard about your outbursts to Mrs. Lynde and going to church with buttercups round your hat, I don't know what she'll think of you. You must be polite and well-behaved, and don't make any of your startling speeches. For pity's sake, if the child isn't actually trembling. Anne was trembling. Her face was pale and tense. Oh, Marilla, you would be excited too if you were going to meet a little girl that you hope to be your bosom friend and whose mother mustn't like you, she said as she hastened to get her hat. They went over to Orchard Slope by the shortcut across the brook and up the Furry Hill Grove. Mrs. Barry came to the kitchen door in answer to Marilla's knock. She was a tall, black-eyed, black-haired woman with a very resolute mouth. She had the reputation of being very strict with her children. "How do you do, Marilla?" she said cordially. "Come in. And this is the little girl you have adopted, I suppose?" "Yes, this is Anne Shirley," said Marilla. "Spelled with an E," gasped Anne, who, tremulous and excited as she was determined that there should be no misunderstanding on that important point. Mrs. Barry, not hearing or not comprehending, merely shook hands and said kindly, "How are you?" "I am well in body, although considerably rumpled up in spirit, thank you, ma'am," said Anne gravely. Then aside to Marilla in an audible whisper, "There wasn't anything startling in that, was there, Marilla?" Diana was sitting on the sofa reading a book which she had dropped when the callers entered. She was a very pretty little girl, with her mother's black eyes and hair and rosy cheeks and the merry expression which was her inheritance from her father. "This is my little girl, Diana," said Mrs. Barry. "Diana, you might take Anne out into the garden and show her your flowers. It will be better for you than straining your eyes over that book. She reads entirely too much." This to Marilla as the little girls went out. "And I can't prevent her, for her father aids and abets her. She's always poring over a book. I'm glad she has the prospect of a playmate. Perhaps it'll take her more out of doors." Outside in the garden, which was full of mellow sunset light streaming through the dark old firs to the west of it, stood Anne and Diana, gazing bashfully at each other over a clump of gorgeous tiger lilies. The berry garden was a bowery wilderness of flowers which would have delighted Anne's heart at any time, less fraught with destiny. It was encircled by huge old willows and tall firs, beneath which flourished flowers that loved the shade. Prim right-angled paths, neatly bordered with clamshells, intersected it like moist red ribbons, and in the beds between, old-fashioned flowers ran riot. They were rosy bleeding hearts and great splendid crimson peonies, white, fragrant narcissi and thorny, sweet Scotch roses, pink and blue and white columbines, and lilac-tinted bouncing beds, clumps of southernwood and ribbon grass and mint, purple Adam and Eve, daffodils, and masses of sweet clover white with its delicate, fragrant, feathery sprays, scarlet lightning that shot its fiery lances over prim white musk flowers. A garden it was where sunshine lingered and bees hummed, and winds, beguiled into loitering, purred and rustled. "Oh, Diana," said Anne at last, clasping her hands and speaking almost in a whisper, do you think that, oh, do you think that you can like me a little, enough to be my bosom friend?" Diana laughed. Diana always laughed before she spoke. "Why, I guess so," she said frankly. "I'm awfully glad that you've come to live at Green Gables. It will be as jolly to have someone to play with. There isn't any other girl who lives near enough to play with, and I've no sisters big enough." "Will you swear to be my friend forever and ever?" demanded Anne eagerly. Diana looked shocked. "Why, it's dreadfully wicked to swear," she said rebukingly. "Oh, no, not my kind of swearing. There are two kinds, you know." "I've never heard of but one kind," said Diana doubtfully. "There really is another. Oh, it isn't wicked at all. It just means vowing and promising solemnly." "Well, I don't mind doing that," agreed Diana, relieved. "How do you do it?" Here are our bosom friends, Anne and Diana. How cute. How cute.
We must join hands, so, said Anne gravely. It ought to be over running water. We'll just imagine that this path is running water. I'll repeat the oath first. I solemnly swear to be faithful to my bosom friend Diana Barry as long as the sun and moon shall endure. Now you say it and put my name in. Diana repeated the oath with a laugh fore and aft, and then she said, You're a queer girl, Anne. I heard that before that you were queer, but I believe I'm going to like you real well. When Marilla and Anne went home, Diana went with them as far as the log bridge. The two little girls walked with their arms about each other. At the brook, they parted with many promises to spend the next afternoon together. Well, did you find Diana a kindred spirit? Asked Marilla as they went up through the garden of Green Gables. Oh, yes, sighed Anne, blissfully unconscious of any sarcasm on Marilla's part. Oh, Marilla, I'm the happiest girl on Prince Edward Island this very moment. I assure you I'll say my prayers with the right good will tonight. Diana and I are going to build a playhouse in Mr. William Bell's birch grove tomorrow. Can I have those broken pieces of china that are out in the woodshed? Diana's birthday is in February and mine is in March. Don't you think that is a very strange coincidence? Diana is going to lend me a book to read. She says it's perfectly splendid and tremendously exciting. She's going to show me a place back in the woods where rice lilies grow. Don't you think that Diana has very soulful eyes? I wish I had soulful eyes. Diana is going to teach me to sing a song called Nellie in the Hazel Dell. She's going to give me a picture to put up in my room. It's a perfectly beautiful picture, she says. A lovely lady in a pale blue silk dress. A sewing machine agent gave it to her. I wish I had something to give to Diana. I'm an inch taller than Diana, but she is ever so much fatter. She says she'd like to be thin because it's so much more graceful. But I'm afraid she said it only to soothe my feelings. We're going to the shore some day to gather shells. We've agreed to call the spring down by the log bridge the Dryad's Bubble. Isn't that a perfectly elegant name? I read a story once about a spring called that. A dryad is a sort of grown up fairy, I think. Well, all I hope is that you won't talk Diana to death, said Marilla. But remember, this in all your planning, Anne. You're not going to play all the time, nor most of it. You'll have your work to do, and it'll have to be done first. Anne's cup of happiness was full, and Matthew caused it to overflow. He had just got home from a trip to the store at Carmody, and he sheepishly produced a small parcel from his pocket and handed it to Anne with a deprecatory look at Marilla. I heard you say you liked chocolate sweeties, so I got you some, he said. Sniffed Marilla. It'll ruin her teeth and stomach. There, child. Don't look so dismal. You can eat those since Matthew has gone and got them. He better have brought you peppermints. They're wholesomer. Don't sicken yourself with eating them all at once now. Oh, no, indeed I won't, said Anne eagerly. I'll eat just one tonight, Marilla, and I can give Diana half of them, can't I? The other half will taste twice as sweet to me if I give some to her. It's delightful to think that I have something to give to her. I will say it for the child, said Marilla when Anne had gone to her gable. She isn't stingy. I'm glad. For all faults I detest stinginess in a child. Dear me, it's only 3 weeks since she came, and it seems as if she's been here always. I can't imagine the place without her. Now don't be looking I told you so, Matthew. That's bad enough in a woman, but it isn't to be endured in a man. I'm perfectly willing to own up that I'm glad I consented to keep the child, and that I'm getting quite fond of her. Don't you rub it in, Matthew Cuthbert. Chapter 13. The Delights of Anticipation. It's time Anne was in to do her sewing, said Marilla, glancing at the clock and then out into the yellow August afternoon where everything was drowsed in the heat. She started playing with Diana more than half an hour morn I gave her leave to, and now she's perched out there on the woodpile talking to Matthew. 19 to the dozen, when she knows perfectly well she ought to be at her work. And of course, he's listening to her like a perfect ninny. I never saw such an infatuated man. The more she talks and the odder things she says, the more he's delighted, evidently. Aunt Shirley, you come right in here this minute. Do you hear me? A series of staccato taps on the west window brought Anne flying in from the yard, eyes shining, cheeks faintly flushed with pink, unbraided hair streaming from behind her in a torrent of brightness. "Oh, Marilla," she exclaimed breathlessly, "there's going to be a Sunday school picnic next week in Mr. Harmon Andrews' field, right near the Lake of Shining Waters. And Mrs. Superintendent Bell and Mrs. Rachel Lynde are going to make ice cream. Think of it, Marilla, ice cream. Oh, Marilla, can I go to it?" "Just look at the clock, if you please, Anne. What time did I tell you to come in?" 2 o'clock. But isn't it splendid about the picnic, Marilla? Please, can I go? Oh, I've never been to a picnic. I've dreamed of picnics, but I never... Yes, I told you to come in at 2 o'clock. And it's 2:45. I'd like to know why you didn't obey me, Anne. Why, I meant to, Marilla, as much as could be. But you have no idea how fascinating Idlewild is. And then, of course, I had to tell Matthew about the picnic. Matthew is such a sympathetic listener. Please, can I go? You'll have to learn to resist the fascination of idle whatever you call it. When I tell you to come in at a certain time, I mean that time, and not a half hour later. And you needn't stop to discourse with sympathetic listeners on your way either. As for the picnic, of course you can go. You're a Sunday school scholar, and it's not likely I'd refuse to let you go when all the other little girls are going. But, faltered Anne, Diana says that everybody must take a basket of things to eat. I can't cook, as you know, Marilla, and I don't mind going to a picnic without puff sleeves so much, but I'd feel terribly humiliated if I had to go without a basket. It's been preying on my mind ever since Diana told me. Well, it needn't prey any longer. I'll bake you a basket. Oh, you dear good Marilla. Oh, you're so kind to me. Oh, I'm so much obliged to you. Getting through with her O's, Anne cast herself into Marilla's arms and rapturously kissed her sallow cheek. It was the first time in her life that childish lips had voluntarily touched Marilla's face. Again, that sudden sensation of startling sweetness thrilled her. She was secretly vastly pleased at Anne's impulsive caress, which was probably the reason why she said, brusquely, There, never mind your kissin' nonsense. I'd sooner see you doing strictly as you're told. As for cooking, I mean to begin giving you lessons in some of these days, but you're so feather-brained, and I've been waiting to see if you'd sober down a little and learn to be a study before I begin. You've got to keep your wits about you in cooking and not stop in the middle of things to let your thoughts rove all over creation. Now, get out your patchwork and have your square done before tea time. I do not like patchwork, said Anne dolefully, hunting out her work basket and sitting down before a little heap of red and white diamonds with a sigh. I think some kinds of sewing would be nice, but there's no scope for imagination in patchwork. It's just one little seam after another, and you never seem to be getting anywhere. But of course I'd rather be Anne of Green Gables sewing patchwork than Anne of any other place with nothing to do but play. I wish time went as quick sewing patches as it does when I'm playing with Diana, though. Oh, we do have such elegant times, Marilla. I have to furnish most of the imagination, but I'm well able to do that. Diana is simply perfect in every other way. You know that little piece of land across the brook that runs up between our farm and Mr. Barry's? It belongs to Mr. William Bell, and right in the corner there's a little ring of white birch trees. The most romantic spot, Marilla. Diana and I have our playhouse there. We call it Idlewild. Isn't that a poetical name? I assure you, it took me some time to think it out. I stayed awake nearly a whole night before I invented it. Then, just as I was dropping off to sleep, it came like an inspiration. Diana was enraptured when she heard it. We've got our house fixed up elegantly. You must come see it, Marilla, won't you? We have great big stones all covered with moss for seats and boards from tree to tree for shelves, and we have all our dishes on them. Of course, they're all broken, but it's the easiest thing in the world to imagine that they're whole. There's a piece of a plate with a spray of red and yellow ivy on it that's especially beautiful. We keep it in the parlor, and we have the fairy glass there too. The fairy glass is as lovely as a dream. Diana found it out in the woods behind their chicken house. It's all full of rainbows, just little young rainbows that haven't grown big yet. And Diana's mother told her if it was broken off a hanging lamp they once used. But it's nicer to imagine that the fairies lost it one night when they had a ball. So we call it the fairy glass. Matthew is going to make us a table. Oh, we've named the little round pool over in Mr. Barry's field Willowmere. I got that name out of the book that Diana lent me. That was a thrilling book, Marilla. The heroine had 5 lovers. I'd be satisfied with one, wouldn't you? She was very handsome, and she went through great tribulations. She could faint as easy as anything. I'd love to be able to faint, wouldn't you, Marilla? It's so romantic. But I'm really very healthy for all. I'm so thin. I believe I'm getting fatter, though. Don't you think I am? I look at my elbows every morning when I get up to see if any dimples are coming. Diana is having a new dress made with elbow sleeves, and she's going to wear it to the picnic. Oh, I do hope it'll be fine next Wednesday. I don't feel that I could endure the disappointment if anything happened to prevent me from getting to the picnic. I suppose I'd live through it, but I'm certain it would be a lifelong sorrow. It wouldn't matter if I got to 100 picnics in after years. They wouldn't make up for missing this one. They're going to have boats on the lake of shining waters and ice cream, as I told you. I've never tasted ice cream. Diana tried to explain what it was like, but I guess ice cream is one of those things that is beyond the imagination. Anne, you have talked even on for 10 minutes by the clock, said Marilla. Now, just for curiosity's sake, see if you can hold your tongue for the same length of time. Anne held her tongue as desired, but for the rest of the week she talked picnic and thought picnic and dreamed picnic. On Saturday it rained, and she worked herself up into such a frantic state lest it should keep on raining until over and Wednesday, that Marilla made her sew an extra patchwork square by way of studying her nerves. On Sunday, Anne confided to Marilla on the way home from church that she actually grew cold all over with excitement when the minister announced a picnic from the pulpit. Such a thrill went up and down my back, Marilla. I don't think I've ever really believed until then that there was honestly going to be a picnic. I couldn't help fearing I'd only imagined it. But when a minister says such a thing in the pulpit, you just have to believe it. You've set your heart too much on things, Anne, said Marilla with a sigh. I'm afraid there'll be a great many disappointments in store for you through life. Oh, Marilla, looking forward to things is half the pleasure of them, exclaimed Anne. You mayn't get the things themselves, but nothing can prevent you from having the fun of looking forward to them. Mrs. Lynde says, "Blessed are they who expect nothing, for they shall not be disappointed." But I think it would be worse to expect nothing than to be disappointed. Marilla wore her amethyst brooch to church that Sunday, as usual. Marilla always wore her amethyst brooch to church. She would have thought it rather sacrilegious to leave it off, as bad as forgetting her Bible or her collection dime. That amethyst brooch was Marilla's most treasured possession. A seafaring uncle had given it to her mother, who in turn had bequeathed it to Marilla. It was an old-fashioned oval containing a braid of her mother's hair, surrounded by a border of very fine amethysts. Marilla knew too little about precious stones to realize how fine the amethysts actually were, but she thought them very beautiful and was always pleasantly conscious of their violet shimmer at her throat, above her good brown satin dress, even though she could not see it. Anne had been smitten with delighted admiration when she first saw the brooch. "Oh, Marilla, it's a perfectly elegant brooch. I don't know how you can pay attention to the sermon or the prayers when you have it on. I couldn't, I know. I think amethysts are just sweet. They are what I used to think diamonds were like. Long ago, before I had ever seen a diamond, I read about them, and I tried to imagine what they would be like. I thought they would be so lovely, glimmering purple stones. When I saw a real diamond in that lady's ring one day, I was so disappointed I cried. Of course, it was very lovely, but it wasn't my idea of a diamond. Will you let me hold the brooch for just 1 minute, Marilla? Do you think amethysts can be the souls of good violets?" Chapter 14, Anne's Confession. One sec. On the Monday evening before the picnic, Marilla came down from her room with a troubled face. "Anne," she said to that small personage who was shelling peas by the spotless table and singing Nellie of the Hazel Dell with a vigor and expression that did credit to Diana's teaching. "Did you see anything of my amethyst brooch? I thought I stuck it into my pincushion when I came home from church yesterday evening, but I can't find it anywhere." "I saw it this afternoon while you were away at the Aid Society," said Anne a little slowly. "I was passing your door when I saw it on the cushion, so I went in to look at it." "Did you touch it?" said Marilla sternly. "Yes," admitted Anne. "I took it up and I pinned it on my dress just to see how it would look." "You had no business to do anything of the sort. It is very wrong in a little girl to meddle. You shouldn't have gone into my room in the first place, and you shouldn't have touched a brooch that didn't belong to you in the second. Where did you put it?" "Oh, I put it back on the bureau. I hadn't it on a minute. Truly, I didn't mean to meddle, Marilla. I don't think about its being wrong to go in and try on the brooch, but I see now that it was, and I'll never do it again. That's one good thing about me. I never do the same naughty thing twice." "You didn't put it back," said Marilla. "That brooch isn't anywhere on the bureau, and you've taken it out or something, Anne." "I did put it back," said Anne quickly, pertly, Marilla thought. "I don't remember whether I stuck it on the pincushion or laid it on the china tray, but I'm perfectly certain I put it back." "I'll go and have another look," said Marilla, determining to be just. "If you put that brooch back, it's there still. If it isn't, I know you didn't, that's all." Marilla went to her room and made a thorough search, not only over the bureau, but in every other place she thought the brooch might possibly be. It was not to be found, and she returned to the kitchen. "Anne, the brooch is gone. By your own admission, you are the last person to handle it. Now, what have you done with it? Tell me the truth at once. Did you take it out and lose it?" "No, I didn't," said Anne solemnly, meeting Marilla's angry gaze squarely. "I never took the brooch out of your room, and that is the truth. If I was to be led to the block for it, although I'm not very certain what a block is. So there, Marilla." Anne's "so there" was intended to emphasize her assertion, but Marilla took it as a display of defiance. "I believe you're telling me a falsehood, Anne," she said sharply. "I know you are. There, Now, don't say anything more unless you're prepared to tell the whole truth. Go to your room and stay there until you are ready to confess." "Will I take the peas with me?" said Anne meekly. "No, I'll finish shelling them myself. Do as I bid you." When Anne had gone, Marilla went about her evening tasks in a very disturbed state of mind. She was worried about her valuable brooch. What if Anne had lost it? And how wicked of the child to deny having taken it, when anybody could see that she must have. With such an innocent face, too. "I don't know what I wouldn't sooner have had happen," thought Marilla, as she nervously shelled the peas. "Of course, I don't suppose she meant to steal it or anything like that. She's just taken it to play with or help that imagination of hers. She must have taken it, that's clear, for there hasn't been a soul in that room since she was in it by her own story until I went up tonight, and the brooch is gone. There's nothing sure. I suppose she's lost it and is afraid to own up for fear she'll be punished. It's a dreadful thing to think she'll tell falsehoods. It's a far worse thing than her fit of temper. It's a fearful responsibility to have a child in your house you can't trust. Slyness and untruthfulness, that's what she's displayed. I declare I feel worse about that than the brooch. If only she'd have told the truth about it, I wouldn't mind so much." Marilla went to her room at intervals all through the evening and searched for the brooch without finding it. A bedtime visit to the east gable procured no result. Anne persisted in denying that she knew nothing about the brooch, but Marilla was only more firmly convinced that she did. She told Matthew the story the next morning. Matthew was confounded and puzzled. He could not quickly lose faith in Anne, but he had to admit that the circumstances were against her. "You're sure it hasn't fell down behind the bureau?" was the only suggestion he could offer. "I've moved the bureau, and I've taken out the drawers, and I've looked in every crack and cranny," was Marilla's positive answer. "The brooch is gone, and that child has taken it and lied about it. That's the plain, ugly truth, Matthew Cuthbert, and we might as well look it in the face." "Well, now, what are you going to do about it?" Matthew asked forlornly, feeling secretly thankful that Marilla and not he had to deal with the situation. He felt no desire to put his oar in this time. "She'll stay in her room until she confesses," said Marilla grimly, remembering the success of this method in the former case. Then we'll see. Perhaps we'll be able to find the brooch if she'll only tell me where she took it, but in any case she'll have to be severely punished, Matthew." "Well now, you'll have to punish her," said Matthew, reaching for his hat. "I've got nothing to do with it, remember. You warned me off yourself." Marilla felt deserted by everyone. She couldn't even go to Mrs. Lynde for advice. She went up to the east gable with a very serious face and left it with a face more serious still. Anne steadfastly refused to confess. She persisted in asserting that she had not taken the brooch. The child had evidently been crying, and Marilla felt a pang of pity, which she sternly repressed. By night she was, as she expressed it, beat out. "You'll stay in this room until you confess, Anne. You'll make up your mind to that," she said firmly. "But the picnic is tomorrow, Marilla," cried Anne. "You won't keep me from going to that, will you? You'll just let me out for the afternoon, won't you? And I'll stay here as long as you like afterwards, cheerfully. I must go to the picnic." "You'll not go to picnics nor anywhere else until you've confessed, Anne." "Oh, Marilla," gasped Anne, but Marilla had gone out and shut the door. Wednesday morning dawned as bright and as fair as if expressly made to order for the picnic. Birds sang around Green Gables. The Madonna lilies in the garden set out whiffs of perfume that entered in on viewless winds at every door and window, and wandered through halls on rooms like spirits of benediction. The birches in the hollow waved joyful hands, as if watching for Anne's usual morning greeting from the east gable, but Anne was not at her window. When Marilla took up her breakfast to her, she found the child sitting primly on her bed, pale and resolute, with tight shut lips and gleaming eyes. Marilla, I'm ready to confess. Ah! Marilla laid down her tray. Once again her method had succeeded, but her success was very bitter to her. Let me hear what you have to say then, Anne. I took the amethyst brooch, said Anne, as if repeating a lesson she had learned. I took it just as you said. I didn't mean to take it when I went in, but it did look so beautiful, Marilla. When I pinned it to my dress, I was overcome by an irresistible temptation. I imagined how perfectly thrilling it would be to take it to Idlewild and play as I was the Lady Cordelia Fitzgerald. It would be so much easier to imagine I was the Lady Cordelia if I had a real amethyst brooch on. Diana and I make a necklace of roseberries, but what are roseberries compared to amethysts? So I took the brooch. I thought I could put it back before you came home. I went all the way around by the road to lengthen out the time. When I was going over the bridge across the lake of shining waters, I took the brooch off to have another look at it. Oh, how it did shine in the sunlight. And then, when I was leaning over the bridge, it just slipped through my fingers. So, and went down, 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 all purply sparkling, and sank forevermore beneath the lake of shining waters. And that's the best I can do at confessing, Marilla. Marilla felt hot anger surge up into her heart again. This child had taken and lost her treasured amethyst brooch, and now sat there, calmly reciting the details thereof, without the least apparent compunction of repentance. And this is terrible, she said, trying to speak calmly. You are the very wickedest girl I ever heard of. Yes, I suppose I am, agreed Anne tranquilly. And I know I'll have to be punished. It'll be your duty to punish me, Marilla. Won't you please get it right off, because I'd like to go to the picnic with nothing on my mind. Picnic indeed! You'll go to no picnic today, Anne Shirley. That shall be your punishment, and if it isn't half severe enough, either, for what you've done. Not go to the picnic? Anne sprang to her feet and clutched Marilla's hand. But you promised me I might. Oh, Marilla, I must go to the picnic. That's why I confessed. Punish me any way you like but that. Oh, Marilla, please, please, please let me go to the picnic. Think of the ice cream. For anything you know, I may never have a chance to taste ice cream again. Marilla disengaged Anne's clinging hands stonily. You needn't plead, Anne. You are not going to the picnic, and that's final. No, not a word. Anne realized that Marilla was not to be moved. She clasped her hands together, gave a piercing shriek, and flung herself face downward on the bed, crying and writhing in an utter abandonment of hope, of disappointment and despair. For the land's sake, gasped Marilla, hastening from the room, I believe that the child is crazy. No child in her senses would behave as she does. If she isn't, she's utterly bad. Oh dear, I'm afraid Rachel was right from the first. I've put my hand to the plow, but I won't look back. That was a dismal morning. Marilla worked fiercely and scrubbed the porch floor and the dairy shelves when she could find nothing else to do. Neither the shelves nor the porch needed it, but Marilla did. Then she went out and raked the yard. When dinner was ready, she went to the stairs and called Anne. A tear-stained face appeared, looking tragically over the banisters. Come down to your dinner, Anne. I don't want any dinner, Marilla, said Anne sobbingly. I couldn't eat anything. My heart is broken. You'll feel remorse of conscience someday, I expect, for breaking it, Marilla, but I forgive you. Remember when the time comes that I forgive you. But please don't ask me to eat anything, especially boiled porks and greens. Boiled pork and greens are so unromantic when one is in affliction. Exasperated Marilla returned to the kitchen and poured out her tale of woe to Matthew, who, between his sense of justice and his unlawful sympathy with Anne, was a miserable man. Well, now, she shouldn't have taken the brooch, Marilla, or told stories about it, he admitted, mournfully surveying his plate of unromantic pork and greens as if he, like Anne, thought a food unsuited to crisis of feeling. But she's such a little thing, such an interesting little thing. Don't you think it's pretty rough not to let her go to the picnic when she's so set on it? Matthew Cuthbert, I'm amazed at you. I think I let her off entirely too easy, and she doesn't appear to realize how wicked she's been. That's what worries me most. If she really felt sorry, it wouldn't be so bad. And you don't seem to realize it either. You're making excuses for her all the time to yourself. I can see that. Well, now, she's such a little thing, feebly reiterated Matthew. And there shall be allowances made, Marilla. You know she's never had any bringing up. Well, she's having it now, retorted Marilla. The retort silenced Matthew, if it did not convince him. That dinner was a very dismal meal. The only cheerful thing about it was Jerry Butte, the hired boy, and Marilla resented his cheerfulness as a personal insult. When her dishes were washed and her bread sponge set and her hens fed, Marilla remembered that she had noticed a small rent in her best black lace shawl when she had taken it off on Monday afternoon on returning from the Ladies' Aid. She would go and mend it. The shawl was in a box in her trunk. As Marilla lifted it out, the sunlight, falling through the vines that clustered thickly about the window, struck upon something caught in the shawl. Something that glittered and sparkled in facets of violet light. Marilla snatched at it with a gasp. It was the amethyst brooch, hanging on to a thread of lace by its catch. Dear life and heart, said Marilla blankly. What does this mean? Here's my brooch, safe and sound, that I thought was at the bottom of Barry's pond. Whatever did that girl mean by saying she took it and lost it? I declare, I believe Green Gables is bewitched. I remember now when I took off my shawl Monday afternoon, I laid it on the bureau for a minute. I suppose the brooch got caught in it somehow. Well, here's the photo of her picture of Marilla discovering her brooch. Marilla betook herself to the east gable brooch in hand. Anne had cried herself out and was sitting dejectedly by the window. Anne Shirley, said Marilla solemnly, I've just found my brooch hanging to my black lace shawl. Now I want to know what that rigmarole was you told me this morning. Why, you said you'd keep me here until I confessed, returned Anne wearily. And so I decided to confess because I was bound to get to the picnic. I thought out a confession last night after I went to bed and made it as interesting as I could. And I said it over and over so that I wouldn't forget it. But you wouldn't let me go to the picnic after all, so all of my trouble was wasted. Marilla had to laugh in spite of herself, but her conscience pricked her. Anne, you do beat all, but I was wrong. I see that now. I shouldn't have doubted your word when I had never known you to tell a story. Of course, it wasn't right for you to confess to a thing you hadn't done. It was very wrong to do so, but I drove you to it. So, if you'll forgive me, Anne, I'll forgive you, and we'll start square again. Now get yourself ready for the picnic. Anne flew up like a rocket. Oh, Marilla, isn't it too late? No, it's only 2:00. There won't be more than a well gathered yet, and it'll be an hour before they have tea. Wash your face, comb your hair, and put on your gingham. I'll find a basket for you. There's plenty of stuff baked in the house. And I'll get Jerry to hitch up the sorrel and drive you down to the picnic ground." "Oh, Marilla!" exclaimed Anne, flying to the washstand. "5 minutes ago I was so miserable. I was wishing I'd never been born. And now I wouldn't change places with an angel." That night, a thoroughly happy, completely tired out Anne returned to Green Gables in a state of beatification impossible to describe. "Oh, Marilla, I've had a perfectly scrumptious time." Scrumptious is a new word I learned today. I heard Mary Alice Bell use it. Isn't it very expressive? Everything was lovely. We had a splendid tea, and then Mr. Harmon Andrews took us all for a row on the lake of shining waters, 6 of us at a time, and Jane Andrews nearly fell overboard. She was leaning out to pick water lilies, and if Mr. Andrews hadn't caught her by her sash just in the nick of time, she'd have fallen in and probably been drowned. I wished it had been me. It would have been such a romantic experience to have been nearly drowned. It would be such a thrilling tale to tell. And we had the ice cream. Words fail to describe that ice cream, Marilla. I assure you it was sublime. That evening, Marilla told the whole story to Matthew over her stocking basket. "I'm willing to own up that I made a mistake," she concluded candidly. "But I've learned a lesson. I have to laugh when I think of Anne's confession, although I suppose I shouldn't, for it really was a falsehood, but it doesn't seem as bad as the other would have been somehow, and anyhow, I'm responsible for it. That child is hard to understand in some respects, but I believe she'll turn out all right yet. And there's one thing certain, no house will ever be dull that she's in." All right, that's it. We'll start on Thursday. So in 2 days from now, I will continue reading on at chapter 15. And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. I've got some fun content coming out soon. So we'll see some videos of my trip to LA as well as some of my book festival preparation. And we'll probably do, once we finish reading on live all of the chapters, I'll do some sort of like Anne of Green Gables tour. We can go through like the shirts that I have and all of the fun editions that I've collected. As always, thank you for being here. I appreciate being able to share this with all of you. It's very, very fun for me to share the love of one of my favorite stories, and I'm really enjoying this, and I hope you are too. All right, take care. Have a great rest of your day, night, wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you in the next video.